Hey guys, tonight we slip into the sandals of a Byzantine librarian, and not just for a quick peek. You're about to live their entire day. Picture yourself in Constantinople, the beating heart of the empire, where domes catch the sunrise like bronze helmets and the streets already buzz with merchants shouting in Greek, Latin, and a dozen other tongues. You're not here to haggle over figs, though. You're trudging toward a library chamber that smells like dust, ink, and a hint of burnt candle wax. The job is quiet, but don't get too comfortable. You probably won't survive the cold drafts, the hours of copying until your back aches, or the possibility of accidentally spilling ink on a priceless gospel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day begins in half-darkness. The library, sometimes called the scriptorium when copying is underway, waits for you like a cool cave. The stone walls hold the night air, and when you step inside, it feels as though you've walked into a crypt. A few wax tapers flicker, throwing uncertain shadows across the desks, and the faint smell of parchment and leather hangs in the gloom. Your fingers already know the grain of the wooden tables, worn by decades of elbows leaning, scratching, and dozing off. You shuffle forward, sandals slapping softly, and there on the desk sits today's task, a stack of parchment sheets, rough cut, and smelling faintly of animal hide. The ink pot is a squat little thing, its rim crusted where yesterday's brush was wiped too hastily. The pen's really sharpened reeds lie bundled together like the world's most disappointing bouquet. You settle onto the bench which creaks under you like it resents another day of your wait, and dip your pen into the ink. Copying begins. Line after line, word after word, you scratch the letters into being. Greek uncials flow across the page, steady and round, meant to endure beyond your lifetime. You know from training that one mistake, one stray dot or broken curve, can alter meaning disastrously. There's a famous cautionary tale. A scribe once miscopied a word in a medical text, turning a harmless herb into something closer to rat poison. Monks still chuckle about it centuries later, though probably not the patients. Your hand cramps, your shoulders ache, and already the temptation grows to let your eyes blur and your pen drift. To shake off the fatigue, you glance at the shelves that ring the chamber. They groan under the weight of codices and scrolls, texts in Greek, Latin, Syriac, and the odd bit of Coptic or Armenian. One corner holds what scholars call the chained books, precious copies of Aristotle and Plato, secured by iron links to prevent accidental borrowing. It's a bit like a medieval library's version of anti-shoplifting tags. There's a rhythm to this work. Scratch, dip, scratch, breathe. Occasionally, you pause to blow gently on the ink so it doesn't smear. And just when you're settling into that meditative state, someone sneezes, loud, wet, echoing through the chamber. Another librarian grumbles, "May St. John Chrysostom protect the parchment?" Because yes, sneezes are considered a dire threat. One good spray, and an entire sheet of gospel is ruined. Light creeps gradually through the narrow slit windows. The sun finds the gilt lettering on the Gospel of Matthew left open overnight, and the letters seem to shimmer as though a divine hand is rewriting them each morning. But you know it's just the gold leaf doing its thing. Beautiful, fragile, and expensive. Mainstream history fact. The imperial libraries in Constantinople once housed tens of thousands of volumes, though fires and neglect would eventually destroy many. The work you're doing is part of a constant battle against time, copying, recopying, hoping something survives the next catastrophe. Quirky tidbit. Librarians sometimes doodle tiny cartoons in the margins. usually hidden behind elaborate initials. You've seen drawings of rabbits chasing hunters or monks riding snails into battle. Today, you're tempted to add a little sketch of a fish juggling scrolls, but you restrain yourself. The overseer has eagle eyes, and he'd notice. And of course, the debates rage. Historians still argue whether the great library at Constantinople was ever a true rival to Alexandria, or if it's just a romantic myth built on fragments of records. You shrug. Either way, you're the one hunched here, preserving what can be preserved. By mid-morning, the stiffness sets in. You stretch your arms, rolling your shoulders, and the bench groans again. A faint rumble outside reminds you of life. Beyond parchment, the clatter of cartwheels, the call of vendors hawking bread, the squawk of a rooster that thinks it's still dawn. For a moment, you wonder what it would be like to swap places with that baker in the street, hands covered in flour instead of ink. Then you look at your ink-blotted fingers and smile. At least your work doesn't involve fire and burns unless you count candle drips. Still, fatigue tugs at you. You rub your temples, glance at the stack you've already filled, and feel a mix of pride and dread. Pride because each sheet is a victory. Dread because the pile waiting to be copied still looms like a mountain. Someone mutters from across the room, only 1,000 more to go. You can't tell if he's joking. The candle nearest you gutters. Its wax pools dangerously close to the parchment, and you push it back, muttering under your breath. Imagine the shame, spending weeks copying a text, only to burn it down in one careless moment. That's the librarian's version of accidentally deleting your essay before saving. You shift your weight, stretch your legs, and finally let yourself sigh. Outside, sunlight now cuts across the tiled roofs. The day is moving forward, and soon it'll be time to leave the safety of these shelves for a different sort of task, venturing into the streets. But for now, you dip your reed pen once more, steady your hand, and let the letters form again, slow and deliberate. You finally push back from the desk, arms stiff and fingers spotted with ink. The overseer gives you a look that hovers somewhere between suspicion and sympathy, as if he can't decide whether you're shirking or suffering nobly. Either way, he waves you toward the door. Time to run errands, the glamorous part of a librarian's day. The streets of Constantinople welcome you with chaos. As you step outside, the air hits warmer, spiced with bread, roasted nuts, and, less pleasantly, horse droppings. The library may be dusty and dim, but at least it doesn't involve dodging ox carts and grumpy vendors. The thoroughfare hums with 1,000 errands like yours. You tuck a list into your sleeve. Today's needs: new parchment sheets, a bundle of sharpened reed pens, and a little gossip, because information is a currency as precious as gold leaf. It's not an official line item, but you know your fellow scribes will grill you when you return. First stop, parchment. The parchment seller's stall reeks faintly of lime pits. Where skins were soaked and scraped, you thumb through a stack of calfskin sheets, some thin as onion peel, others thick and stiff. The seller eyes you warily, perhaps remembering that librarians are notorious hagglers. "This one's too rough," you murmur. "This one's uneven. That one looks like a goat chewed it before you did." He scowls, but eventually bundles you a stack that passes muster. Reed pens come next. A boy is whittling them at the stall, shavings curling around his feet. You test a few tips against your thumb. Some are sharp enough to pierce skin, others blunt as a spoon. You buy a handful, muttering about quality control, though really you're just glad not to cut your own reeds by the riverbank anymore. As you head deeper into the market, the noise thickens. Bakers slap dough on hot stones, metalworkers hammer rhythmically, and from somewhere above, pigeons coo like they're mocking you. The market is both tedious and fascinating. Every trip you spot something new. Today, it's a man juggling knives near the fishmongers, dangerously close to a basket of eels. The crowd cheers, half hoping he drops one. Mainstream fact: Constantinople's markets were legendary for their abundance. The empire's trade routes funneled goods from Asia, Africa, and Europe into these stalls. Silk, spices, furs, and more mundane things like lamp oil and beans. For a librarian, parchment and ink were small links in this vast chain of commerce. Quirky tidbit. Some Byzantines believed parchment had medicinal uses. Powdered scrapings were supposedly good for stomach ailments. You imagine grinding down hours of your painstaking work just so someone could swallow Aristotle for indigestion. It feels like a cosmic insult. On your way back, you pause by a street preacher who's railing against heresy. His voice booms, his beard bristles, and his arms slice the air like he's conducting a furious orchestra. The crowd listens, half entranced, half bored. You catch only fragments, something about divine light, something about heretical shadows. Historians still argue whether such street sermons swayed the masses or were more like background noise, the medieval equivalent of someone shouting opinions on a street corner while everyone keeps shopping. You shake your head and slip away before he notices your bundle of parchment. The last thing you need is to be mistaken for a scholar of the wrong persuasion. On the corner by the bakery, you spot familiar faces, two fellow librarians, clearly sneaking a snack. They're hunched over flatbreads dripping with honey, trying to look inconspicuous. They wave you over, and you give them the parchment eye glare. "You're supposed to be copying," you hiss. One shrugs, honey glistening on his chin. "We're fortifying ourselves against boredom." He offers a bite, but you decline. Sticky fingers and parchment don't mix. You make a mental note of the gossip. One claims the imperial court is arguing over a new tax on olive oil. Another swears a bishop's nephew was caught drunk in the hippodrome. None of it is written down, of course, but later, back in the library, these little tidbits will spice up the long hours. On the way back, you pass by a colonnaded square where statues of long-dead emperors glower in marble silence. Their noses are chipped, their togas stained with soot, but they still radiate that imperial "don't mess with me" aura. You wonder if any librarian ever dared doodle mustaches on their scrolls. Probably not if they wanted to keep their job. A beggar tugs at your sleeve near the gates. His hands are grimy, his eyes sharp. You slip him a copper, not out of saintly charity, but because you know he doubles as a walking news service. "What's the word?" you murmur. He grins, revealing more gaps than teeth. They say the emperor's been seen in the palace garden at night, talking to himself. You raise an eyebrow. Either it's madness, piety, or just rumor. Either way, you'll retell it tonight. By the time you return toward the library, your shoulders ache under the bundle of parchment, and your sandals are dusty. The streets are louder than ever, midday sun hammering the stones, sweat dripping into your eyes. You dodge one last cart, sidestep a goat that clearly thinks it owns the road, and finally step back through the heavy door into the quiet, cool gloom. The shift from chaos to silence is almost a shock. Inside, the only sounds are the scratching of pens and the occasional cough. You set down your supplies with a satisfying thump, brush dust from your sleeves, and exchange a look with your fellow scribes. One mouths, "Well?" You grin, ready to spill the market gossip as if it's treasure. After all, parchment and pens may keep the library alive, but it's stories, sacred, scandalous, and silly, that keep the librarians sane. The room is quieter now, but not still. Afternoon has a way of settling into the scriptorium like a heavy cloak. Dust floats in slow spirals where sunbeams poke through the slits in the walls. You slide onto your creaking bench again. Parchment, stacked neatly in front of you, but this time the energy feels different. Not the hushed loneliness of mourning, but the busy hum of collaboration. Today, you're not just a copyist. You're a referee, a participant, and occasionally a comedian. In the circus of scholars, it starts innocently enough. A monk across the table squints at his page, lips moving as he whispers the words. His handwriting looks like a chicken dance through the ink. You lean over. "That's supposed to be an epsilon," you murmur. He groans, rubbing his temples. "It looked like an epsilon when I started." You shake your head, but smile, half. Your job is catching mistakes before they fossilize into permanent nonsense. Around you, debates spark like flint on stone. One group of scribes is arguing whether Aristotle's texts should be read literally or as metaphor. Another insists Plato has been mistranslated again and gestures wildly with a pen, sending droplets of ink spattering like tiny night stars across the table. You cover your parchment quickly before your hard work gains an accidental constellation. Mainstream fact: Byzantine libraries weren't just dusty warehouses. They were hubs of learning, where scholars gathered to study and argue. Some even claim the great imperial library had lecture halls attached, though whether they rivaled Alexandria's is, well, still debated. The real joy and headache of afternoons is collaboration. A philosopher from Athens has shown up today, insisting his interpretation of Aristotle is correct because he feels it in his bones. A local cleric counters with, "Your bones are heretical." The argument rumbles on, voices rising, parchment, flapping like banners in a storm. You sit between them, copying steadily, pretending you're Switzerland, and then there's the pest you can't ignore, bookworms, literally. One of your neighbors yelps as he flips a page and finds a pale, wriggling line tunneling through the parchment. "They've struck again," he cries. Everyone groans. The tiny invaders chew through centuries-old vellum as if it's their divine mission. Quirky tidbit: librarians sometimes sprinkled pepper or even rubbed onion juice onto parchment edges. To deter them, you've tried it. It only makes the pages smell like a poorly stocked pantry. You brush at your own stack nervously. No worms today, thank heaven. But the knowledge that they lurk, gnawing silently, is enough to haunt your dreams. Honestly, if you ever wake screaming, it'll be less about invading armies and more about losing half a gospel to something the size of an eyelash. The hours stretch on, your hand cramps again, but there's no escape. Someone mutters a prayer under his breath, though whether it's for divine guidance or just patience, you're not sure. Another scholar nods off mid-line, his forehead nearly kissing the parchment. You poke him gently. "Better your head than your inkpot." He grunts awake, blinking blearily, and tries to pretend he wasn't drooling on his sleeve. There's laughter, too. A scribe on the far end has secretly slipped a doodle of a pig in a bishop's hat into the corner of his page. When it circulates, the room ripples with muffled chuckles. You shake your head. Dangerous, but undeniably funny. Imagine if that slipped past inspection. Centuries later, some poor historian would stare at it and wonder if Byzantium really ordained swine. Historians still argue whether this era saw a genuine revival of classical texts or if it was more of a selective preservation project. From where you're sitting, the answer is obvious: both. You're saving what matters to your empire, religious texts, laws, sermons, but you're also ferrying Aristotle and Plato across centuries, line by line. It feels noble on good days, crushing on others. The air grows thick with ink fumes and candle smoke. Your stomach growls, betraying you, and a neighbor smirks. "Thinking of bread again?" he whispers. You grin, guilty. Yes, bread, olives, maybe a sliver of cheese. Anything but parchment. Afternoons often stretch into what feels like forever. Sometimes a visitor breaks the monotony. A student arrives to beg for a look at a manuscript. The overseer, stern as stone, says no. These are not lending library days. Still, you remember being a student once, desperate to touch wisdom bound in leather and ink. You slip the boy a glance that says, "Someday, if you're patient, you'll earn your seat at this miserable, wonderful table." Time blurs. The scratching of pens becomes a background hum. like cicadas in the heat. You copy, correct, sigh, laugh, and repeat. Each sheet you finish is a small triumph, though your eyes sting from the effort. Outside, the streets must be alive with afternoon. Bustle, but in here you're locked in a slow battle against boredom and ink stains. Finally, the bell tolls from a nearby church. Evening approaches. Some scholars stretch and shuffle away muttering about dinner. You linger, stacking your parchment carefully. The overseer nods at you approvingly, or maybe just relieved you haven't doodled pigs. As the last shafts of sunlight fade, you gather your things. There's no rest yet. Tonight you're summoned beyond this little chamber, deeper into the palace archives, where the air is thicker with secrets than dust. The workday isn't over, it's only shifting gears. You step out of the scriptorium just as twilight begins to soften the sky. The day's dust still clings to your sandals, but now your destination isn't the market or a tavern, it's the palace. A messenger, red-faced and breathless, had appeared earlier with instructions. Deliver a small bundle of scrolls to a court official before nightfall. The request feels routine, but your stomach tightens. The palace archive is no place for casual mistakes. The streets toward the palace are different in the evening. Vendors pack away their wares, children chase each other through alleys, and the scent of roasted chestnuts lingers. Guards in bronze helmets patrol with measured steps, their spears gleaming like warning signs. You clutch your satchel closer, suddenly aware that the bundle under your arm isn't just parchment. It's leverage, memory, evidence. When you pass through the bronze gates of the imperial compound, the atmosphere shifts. Noise dies down as though the walls themselves swallow it. Courtyards stretch wide, echoing your footsteps. Torches sputter along colonnades, their flames bending in the fars. Sea breeze that drifts off the Bosporus. For a brief moment you think, if ink and parchment are fragile, power is even more so. Just paper orders and whispered decrees standing between order and chaos. Inside the archive, the air is cooler, heavier. The chamber is a labyrinth of shelves, stacked with codices bound in leather, papyrus scrolls in pigeonhole cubbies, even a few tablets left over from older centuries. The smell here is different from the scriptorium. Less ink, more dust, with a note of beeswax from the sealed jars of documents. You pause, letting your eyes adjust. Candles flicker on iron stands, making shadows lurch like tired archivists. Clerk in silk robes looks up, squinting. "You're late," he says, though the sun hasn't fully set. His tone makes you wonder if librarians ever arrive on time in his world. You hand over the bundle carefully. He inspects the seals, as though searching for a reason to accuse you of treason, then finally nods. Leave them on the oak table. You do, but curiosity tugs. These are imperial records, tax rolls, decrees, maybe even letters between emperors and generals. To peek would be dangerous, but oh, the temptation. Knowledge is intoxicating. Instead, you let your gaze wander the shelves. Mainstream fact. The Byzantine Palace archives stored not just laws and theological treatises, but also diplomatic correspondence. Alliances with Persia, treaties with barbarian tribes, instructions to generals, all lived here in fragile ink. To hold one scroll could be to hold the fate of an entire province. Quirky tidbit. Some rumors claim the archives also held prophecies, sealed and hidden away, predicting everything from imperial deaths to earthquakes. Were they genuine visions or just political fan fiction? Hard to say, but whispers about secret prophecies traveled faster than official edicts. The clerk clears his throat sharply, reminding you that loitering is noticed. You bow slightly, but your eyes flick to one shelf stacked with older codices, their spines fraying. The temptation gnaws at you. Historians still argue whether librarians had free access to such treasures or if most were locked down by paranoid officials. Tonight, you're on the outside of that locked door, hands itching but empty. A rustle distracts you. Another official sweeps in, robes trailing, muttering about missing charters from a border town. He snaps at the clerk, who scrambles to retrieve a box. You can't help but grin. The mighty empire still runs on misplaced paperwork. Even here, bureaucracy reigns supreme. The longer you linger, the more the archive feels alive, like a slumbering beast. Scrolls whisper when the torches flicker. The leather covers breathe faintly in the drafts. You imagine, just for a moment, that the books are watching, waiting for a chance to reveal or conceal truths. A silly thought, maybe, but one that comes easily in the half-light. Eventually, the clerk waves you off with a bored flick of his hand. Go before the gates close. You bow again, relieved. The palace is impressive, yes, but also suffocating. Too much weight in those shelves, too many secrets that could ruin or save lives. You prefer the dusty honesty of the scriptorium, where the only danger is a worm in your parchment or a sneeze at the wrong moment. Still, as you leave, you can't help but wonder, which of the texts you copied today will ever make it into these archives, which will be lost to fire, neglect, or conquest, which, like the so-called secret prophecies, will be hidden away forever, leaving future historians to argue and guess. Outside again, the night air feels like freedom. The torches of the palace fade behind you as you walk the cobbled streets back toward familiar shadows. The satchel at your side is lighter now, your steps slower, your thoughts heavier. Ahead, the library windows glow faintly with lamplight, promising the last task of the day. The library greets you again with its warm lamplight, a welcome after the echoing chill of the palace. Candles hiss as they burn low, dripping rivulets of wax like slow clocks, keeping their own strange time. Most of your fellow scribes have drifted. Away by now, home to dinner, to bed, to snoring families. But you remain, appointed for the quietest and most fragile duty, the night watch by the lamp. On the table before you lies a codex in need of mending. Its binding has loosened. Parchment sheets sag in their stitching like teeth wobbling before they fall. You lay out your tools, a bone folder, linen thread, scraps of clean parchment. The lamp flame leans toward you as if curious, and you begin the slow ritual of repair. The scriptorium at night feels different, more intimate. Each creak of the benches sounds like a voice. The shelves loom taller, shadows stretching, as though the books themselves are keeping vigil. You hum softly to break the silence, though the tune is aimless. Every so often you hear the faint scrape of a mouse in the wall, reminding you that even emperors and gospels compete with rodents. Mainstream fact. Byzantine codices often used sturdy leather covers, sometimes ornamented with crosses or saints in hammered gold. But the stitching inside was plain linen, and it was your job to ensure it held fast. You loop the thread carefully now, making each knot a small prayer for endurance. The work is soothing, but it also sharpens your sense of time. Each fragile book feels like an hourglass, sand slipping away unless someone steadies it. Quirky tidbit. Some scribes used to slip jokes into colophons, those little notes at the end of a text. One famously wrote, "The hand that wrote this is rotting in the grave, but the words live on." You consider adding your own note tonight. This book was held together by one underpaid, underfed librarian with very clean hands. Still, there's reverence in this task. You know too well that fire, flood, or careless rulers can erase centuries. Historians still argue whether the worst fires of Constantinople destroyed vast libraries or only smaller collections. Either way, the threat lingers. Every knot you tie tonight feels like defiance against oblivion. The hours stretch. You pause to rest your eyes, gaze at the wavering flame, and imagine voices rising from the books around you. A sermon by Chrysostom murmurs in one corner. Aristotle clears his throat impatiently on another shelf. A saint sighs heavily from a gilded cover, perhaps wondering if mortals will ever stop arguing about doctrine. You almost laugh. It's late, you're tired, and exhaustion makes ghosts out of parchment. The lamp sputters. You trim the wick with a small hook, catching the burnt fragment before it falls into the oil. The room smells faintly of smoke, a soft blanket that settles over your shoulders. Outside, the city has quieted. Only the distant bark of a dog, the faint slap of waves against the sea walls, and the occasional shout of a watchman remind you the world hasn't ended. You finish the binding at last, smoothing the codex flat. Its spine feels firmer, its pages safe for another century, maybe longer if luck and care hold. You place it gently on the shelf, a small victory tucked away between larger battles. And now the silence deepens. You lean back, rubbing your eyes. Your hands smell of leather and thread, your back aches. And yet there's a peace in this moment. For all the drudgery, for all the ink stains and wormholes, you've carried a fragment of human memory across. Another day. Tomorrow the cycle begins again. Parchment, pens, markets, debates, archives. But tonight, just for now, you let yourself breathe in the stillness, the lamp guttering, the shelves heavy with words, the air scented with beeswax and smoke. It all blurs softly as your eyelids sink. You imagine the future, some reader centuries away, holding the very book you've mended, never knowing your name, and you smile. Obscurity is the librarian's gift to the world, and now as the story closes, the pace slows with it. You can picture yourself leaning against the desk, listening to the lamp hiss quietly, like the ocean in miniature. The books rest in their shelves, undisturbed, their spines catching the last shiver of flame. Beyond the windows, Constantinople has gone to sleep. Even the markets and taverns have surrendered to the calm of the night. Your breathing softens with the cities, each inhale longer than the last, each exhale heavier, warmer, carrying away the day's weight. The shelves blur into shadows, the lamp into a dim star. The rustle of parchment fades until it is no more than the whisper of your own dreams beginning. The empire, the debates, the errands, even the palace secrets, all recede now, leaving only a hush like the sea beyond the walls. You're safe in that quiet safe, in the dim glow of words preserved, safe enough to let go. So close your eyes. Let the story sink beneath you like a soft bed of parchment, each page cradling you more gently than the last. Tomorrow can wait. Tonight belongs to rest and to silence. Good night.